I want to say a big thank you to President NYCHA Torres for welcoming us. We are going to hear from her and several other NYCHA resident leaders in just a few minutes because today the Comptroller's Office is announcing a major step forward in what we're calling our people-powered audit process. People know the Comptroller's Office for its audits, and we have an amazing team of auditors, and actually you're going to hear shortly from our Deputy Comptroller for Audit, Maura Hayes-Chafe, who's done a really tremendous job alongside her great team, Faggy Hornung, Edward Carey, and Marianne Mullaney. For years, our audit bureau has been doing great audits going into every city agency. We're called on to audit every city agency at least once every 4 years and really make sure, are they doing the work the way that they're supposed to? Where is the money going? How is the oversight handled? And what we are adding to that for the first time is to say we want to match the hard-hitting work of our auditors with the wisdom of New York's residents. And where better to start that than at NYCHA, at the New York City Housing Authority. So our very first people-powered audit process is a NYCHA resident-powered audit process, and that's what we're here to announce and launch today, and we're really excited about it. There's a few reasons why that makes sense. First, of course, NYCHA residents are the experts on their living conditions, on what needs to change at NYCHA, and nobody knows better than folks who have been living in their buildings for decades, who have grown up there, who raised their families there, to know what it is that we should be paying close attention to, that we should be doing oversight of. So NYCHA residents are the experts. Second, we have seen such a tremendous breakdown of trust at NYCHA, and you've seen that everywhere. And we can't make it work in New York City to have government function well if we have a trust breakdown. And so we've got to build something better between city government, between elected officials, between city agencies, and between the residents who rely on those services. That's why I'm so delighted today to be joined by other elected officials. We've got the chair of the New York State Senate Housing Committee, Brian Kavanaugh, and our local city council member, Christopher Marte. And it's why we're here with this great group of resident leaders, because a part of what audits can do when people understand where they came from and why they're happening is help restore that trust when people believe that they'll be told the truth, that they could get answers to their questions. So residents are the experts. We're looking to restore trust. And of course, what we really want to do is help make change. And you know, audits can be really hard-hitting. They can tell the truth. They can find data. But if you don't have a broader group of people who care, then it's a lot less likely that change will get made. Sometimes you have an agency that'll say, thank you, Comptroller, for that audit. We're going to work really hard to make the change. But more often, the audit, winds up slipping away. The agency says, oh, we got other things to work on. When you have big problems, in addition to good audits and good oversight, you need to build a powerful group of people who care about those results and stand together to demand that the recommendations actually get implemented, right? Yes. All of that is why we believe that these NYCHA resident-powered audits are really critical. So we started in the Comptroller's Office last year to say, well, first let's just go out and start talking to residents and asking them what they think. And so we developed a survey. We went out and talked to about 800 NYCHA residents about what was working and what was not working. We did NYCHA resident town halls across the boroughs. We went out to family days and we surveyed people. And actually, from those town halls and surveys, we did a couple of quick audits right away. One thing we heard in a bunch of buildings, actually I remember I was out in Brooklyn at a development and they took me over and just showed me that every one of the entry doors in that development was open. And the residents didn't feel safe because the doors didn't close and lock. And so we did a first kind of all-hands audit where all of the 120 people in our audit bureau, even though they're working on audits at the Department of Environmental Protection and the Office of Technology and everywhere else, every one of them took a couple of days, went out in the field, and we looked at every single entry door on every building in every NYCHA development across the city. And it won't surprise anyone to learn that we found that 40% 50% of them did not properly lock and close, and we put that audit out right away. We also did one of those town halls at Red Hook houses where residents told us about a glitch that was causing a lot of problems in rent calculation, and a whole bunch of people thought that they were having their rent increase more than their income had gone up, and so we started an audit looking at rent setting. In this case, just at that one development, but again, guided by what we were hearing on the ground. And then after those town halls, after those family days, after 800 surveys, we said, you know what, all of that is good input, but if you're really being guided by residents, then you need an audit committee. That's how audits work. Audits are led by audit committees. And so we put out a call, we got a wonderful set of nominations, and we brought together about a 15-person NYCHA resident audit committee. And that set of people sat down with us and looked at the results of those surveys, looked at all the ideas that had come from the town halls, came up with their own ideas, and they developed and brainstormed about 20 different ideas for audits. We would love over time to do every one of them, but then we said, all right, you know, when rubber hits the road, we only have so much audit capacity. Let's pick 2 to start. And they had a really thoughtful dialogue and conversation process, did some straw polls and some ranked choice voting, and ultimately chose the 2 audits that we are so excited to announce that we're going to be starting today. The first of them, so, you know, top of mind, no surprise for residents, is issues of repairs, how the work gets done, and in particular what folks asked us is, you know, how do the contractors get hired? How do they get evaluated? And is there any consequence for the ones that don't do the work so they won't get hired again? And actually, if we've got contractors that are doing a great job, let's make sure we give them more contracts, basic systems of accountability. And of course, audits are all about accountability, and that's what residents are asking for, really no more, no less. When we hire contractors, what's the process of vetting? Is there oversight to make sure the work gets done? Do they get evaluated? And do those evaluations have anything to do with whether they get more work or they don't get more work? So that is the first audit that we are beginning. What oversight does NYCHA do of contractors hired for repair work, and what difference does that make? And then for the second audit, we're going to take a hard look at the question of eviction rates at the RAD and PAC developments. It's no secret that the dialogue amongst residents about the set of choices for their future is really critical to people. And that's a much bigger process, but one specific question that really avails itself of auditing is to look at the developments that have gone into RAD and PAC and ask the question, have eviction rates changed since the transfer to RAD and PAC? And kind of what's behind that if they have. So that also another really good area for an audit that really came from the voices of residents on this audit committee. And I think it's important to be clear, you know, our audit team, you know, we ultimately got to make the decisions, our audit team doing the work, but the whole idea here was to come out with something that was different than what it would have been done if our staff, even though some of them have lived in NYCHA or have family members there, or different from what I would have selected. It's like, what does this body of residents think is critical to get accountability and to restore trust at this moment in time so we can build a broader effort for change. So these 2 audits of oversight of contractors and of eviction rates in the RAD and PAC developments are the first 2 selected by this wise body of residents. They're going to carry us forward. Finding solutions in city government requires deep commitment to doing the work, and we are so excited to be getting started on that together this year. And I want to say a big, big thank you to everybody who's here, to our elected officials, to my remarkable staff, but especially today to our NYCHA resident leaders who have put in a lot of time, have a lot of reasons for distrust, for frustration, to wonder if they're really ever going to see progress, who nonetheless have stepped up and said, let's be part of doing these NYCHA residents audits together. So let's hear it for all of you. We are going to hear from 3 of them. We're going to hear from Isa Torres, who's the president here at Smith Houses. We're going to hear from Brenda Temple, and we are going to hear from Jovetta Page from Stapleton Houses. Excuse me, Brenda Temple from Oceanside Houses, and Jovetta Page from Stapleton Houses. And then we're going to hear from our 2 elected officials. But before that, I want to introduce our Deputy Comptroller for Audits, who's the one who said, let's work together to build on the great team of auditors we have. bring it together with residents so we can really make NYCHA resident-powered auditing a reality in New York City. Deputy Comptroller for Audits, Maura Hayes-Chafe.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I serve as a Deputy Comptroller for Audit within the Comptroller's office, and I'd really like to begin by thanking our NYCHA Resident Audit Committee for being a part of this work. It's a large commitment in time and energy, and we really appreciate that they have agreed to do so and to join us in this exciting process. Our goal is to conduct audits and make recommendations where needed that reflect the concerns faced by those closest to the issues addressed and to help advance change at city agencies. We want to make things better. As an auditor, I'm always excited about how our work can reach more people and impact more lives. I thank my audit team for the work that has already been done and in advance of what is to come as we work to bring NYCHA's attention to key areas of concern. All New Yorkers deserve safe, affordable housing. NYCHA is the largest public housing authority in the nation. Hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers live in NYCHA developments, and it's crucial that NYCHA work effectively. Our office set up a series of roundtables and surveys to reach residents as we embarked on this resident-powered process. We collected close to 800 survey responses in multiple languages from all 5 boroughs and representing a diverse demographic mix. One of the really striking things of the process was the consistency of what we heard across the board in all forums. Regardless of location, residents agreed that NYCHA was falling short on security, building maintenance, and rental assistance. Many expressed skepticism that NYCHA is spending money wisely. The frustration and skepticism of residents is something we will strive to address through this process, through increased transparency, along with changes that we hope will improve NYCHA's effectiveness. The Comptroller's Office is in process of implementing significant changes and new approaches to performance auditing. This is the first time we're implementing a resident-powered approach. Residents have had an opportunity to collaboratively decide on the audits we will conduct, and we will be moving forward with these. As the audits get underway and continue, we will rely on the Resident Audit Committee to provide input and to ensure their voices are reflected in our reports. At the end of the day, our goal is for New York City to function better and residents to be happier with the services that are provided. That begins with listening to New Yorkers most impacted by the services under review. We put together the NYCHA Resident Audit Committee to increase transparency and to help bridge the gap between community and government. We asked residents, what would you like us to audit? What issues are important to you? What answers are you seeking? Where do you feel there's less transparency? People-powered audits recognize that end users of services are in a better position than anybody else to identify issues that potentially impact service delivery. So we're very excited about this process. We're excited to be working with the resident committee during the coming year, and I really thank you today for attending. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Nina Saxon, who is our manager of NYCHA Relations and Faith Communities within our Public Relations Bureau. Thank you.
Good morning. I have the distinguished honor to introduce amazing thought leaders who really worked hard in this process and who think about residents first. So the first speaker I would like to introduce is no stranger to Smith Houses. She is the fierce leader of Smith Houses and part of the Lower East Side, if you ask some people, Miss Aisa Torres.
Thank you. Good morning. This audit is so important, and one of the struggles that I've had in the last 12 years as resident leader of Alfred E. Smith Houses is about us being heard and respected, and understanding that we are citizens, that we pay taxes, we pay rent, and more importantly, that we're human beings, right? And so what this audit means to me, and I'm going to, the residents of NYCHA, right, need answers to these critical quality of life issues involving disproportionate rates of many illnesses that are disparating, and reminders of the struggles we face. The audit we have selected are important steps to finding the solutions to these problems. I have to tell you on a personal note, you know, I also sit on CCOP, so I'm Manhattan South chair for the district. But on a personal note, when it comes to Smith, right, I've lived here most of my life. I raised my children, partially my grandchildren, is that Smith has the distinction of being the only one who sits on ground zero. And so we had a contractor here, and the contract wasn't followed. And because it wasn't followed, about 5 years ago, I had 4 women come to me and tell me that they had 9/11 cancer. Since that time, we've lost a board member, we've lost several residents, and let's not talk about the pandemic, right? And so this audit to me is personal. It means about saving lives, about making people accountable when they come into our communities, and understanding that we have rights, right? And that we be respected at all times. And so I thank the Comptroller for, number one, respecting us, for forming this committee, for bringing us together. And no, we all don't agree, right? And that's okay, but there's respect, because we have dialogue. And I am so honored today to be with other co-chairs and the TA presidents from the Manhattan South District that are here, and our elected officials who are supporting us in our mission for the world to listen to us, to fund us, and recognize that we are human beings and that we need to be respected, and we need to know what is going on in our communities. And I thank you.
The next speaker is no stranger to keeping it real. She will let you know how it is, what it is, when it is, and you're going to listen. Miss Brenda Temple.
Okay.
All right. Now you got to keep it real.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Brenda Temple. I'm a member of the Committee for Independent Community Action, founded by Dr. Lenore Fulani, and I've been at this NYCHA housing crisis for about 8-9 years. I am also the second vice president of Oceanside Houses in Rockaway, Queens. At present, there is mounting evidence of the harm the federal RAD program is having on residents. This is why we are glad Brad Lander has created a committee of residents who will sit at the table to address our concerns. We are counting on him and his office to find and hold accountable NYCHA and the privatization programs, because we know that it does not work. Evictions are one example, and my neighbors at Ocean Bay Houses have been central to that discussion. While NYCHA only counted 15 evictions, the private management company Wavecrest counted 50, and later study published in City Limits found that at least 80. So far, nothing has been done by policymakers to investigate these evictions. Meanwhile, the RAD PAC program has been expanded to other developments. How? Given RAD's commitment to maintaining tenancy, evictions are blatantly evidence of policy failure. Additionally, we should be investigating why NYCHA's count is so low, even in comparison to the notoriously bad landlord like Wavecrest. Based on research conducted between 2020 and 2021, PACT has negatively impacted the right of housing for low-income residents by leading in a reduction in oversight and crucial protections for tenants, rights including the loss of federal monitor overseeing a previous settlement with NYCHA. In turn, this may render tenants more vulnerable to other violations of their rights, such as increased evictions leading to loss of housing or ongoing habitability issues. In 2021, what is the name of this? In 2021, the Housing Rights Commission felt so concerned about RAD PACT that they wrote to the U.S. Senate Banking Committee and U.S. Housing Financial Services Committee demanding that Congress fund Section 9 public housing immediately. Their letter highlighted three important realities that have yet to be resolved by policymakers and need immediate attention. Federal budget cuts to Section 9 public housing have violated human rights of public housing residents. Alternatives to Section 9 program like RAD PACT have resulted in a rollback of oversight and tenant protections of tenants. It is also not clear that RAD has led to consistent improvements to the quality of housing, with many tenants reporting ongoing safety hazards and half-done projects. Neighbors, NYCHA Neighbors Helping Neighbors, residents of public housing developments in Far Rockaway, surveyed 10% of the tenants at Ocean Bay houses in the winter of 2021 to 2022, 5 years after conversion. Their report supports conclusions drawn by Human Rights Watch and highlights other concerns that might help explain evictions if more thoroughly investigated. Specifically, the report by NYCHA Neighbors Helping Neighbors found that rents have been going up since the conversion, with some tenants reporting annual increases. Additionally, 1 in 6 residents surveyed have either been threatened with eviction or knew someone who had been threatened with eviction. In addition to this audit on evictions, policymakers should conduct robust outreach to tenants at Ocean Bay houses and BETANCES, BETANCES, to investigate further. While increased evictions are only happening at 2 developments right now, the broader rollback of tenants' rights and protections is additionally concerning and must be investigated. Again, city resources must be directed towards robust outreach to tenants in converted buildings to learn more about tenant experiences of RAD impact. In the meantime, the RAD PACT program should be halted completely, and NYCHA should pivot towards securing the necessary funds to make repairs from the state and feds through the Section 9 public housing program. And to be clear, and in closing, the NYCHA Trust is not an adequate alternative to PACT and RAD. Instead, the Trust employs similar mechanisms that will create similar risks for tenants. So we're saying fund Section 9 now, and we know that Brad Lander and his team will find the money and hold these people accountable. Thank you.
All right, you didn't lie, Nina.
Our last speaker came all the way from Staten Island. She's a true person who believes in the community and believes with the power that if people come together, we can do anything. I want to introduce Ms. Giovanna Page.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ms. Page, and I'm coming all the way from Staten Island, which usually we're considered the forgotten borough. So I really want to extend the thanks for Mr. Brad Lander for remembering us, because a lot of times we tend to voice an opinion or raise concerns in Staten Island, but we're never heard. In lieu of that, I'm on the resident audit committee, yet I'm the only one from Staten Island. I'm not a TA president, but I am a community leader. I believe in people first, and this is truly a blessing for me to be able to stand here and be able to give the people of Stapleton an answer. When they say, Ms. Page, what's going on with the rent? I can give them an answer. When they say, Ms. Page, what's going on with the repairs? I can give them an answer. When they say, is there anything better? What's the deal with RAD PACT? I can give them an answer. Okay, so the biggest thing that we're really looking at as far as the RAD PACT is we're really zeroing in on eviction. Why does it seem like the people are stating that they're being evicted on a rapid rate from RAD, PACT, and not from NYCHA? So our job, our beautiful job, is to dive into that. Let's look into why these things are transpiring, and not only just look into it, but also give a hand. Let's fix it. Let's do something different. It's really important for all of us to be standing up here. And I'm not just black, not just brown. We have our Caucasians too. That means we're unified. That means we're diverse. We're different. And we are standing up here with the powers that be to say, y'all can do this. And so since they said that we can do it, we're going to show the NYCHA development, the people who run it, the residents, that we are standing for change. So with that being said, I wanted to say thank you. Whatever it comes out, yes, no, we're here to basically dive into it. And thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Thank you, Ms. Temple. Thank you, Ms. Torres. You could hear just from the three of them how much we gain from bringing NYCHA resident voices to the table. And obviously not everybody agrees on all the questions and issues of the day. That's true amongst elected officials. It's true amongst NYCHA resident leaders. But when you're afraid of that, if you say, well, there's going to be different points of view on these questions, so let's not bring people to the table to try to make decisions together, you lose out on the critical experience that's here. And what we found in that room was, of course, there were different points of view on the questions of RAD and PACT and the trust. And of course, there were different points of view on what thing was most important to audit and where we should start. But by having dialogue and conversation, by listening to each other, by listening to the voices of residents, we came to a lot of consensus about where to begin. And we've built the foundation for something that I think will really help point us in strong directions as we now go about. And I do want to make this clear. Now it's handed off to our auditors, and they've got a whole set of standards, what are called the GAGA standards, government accounting standards, that they use to make sure the work is done according to the whole set of objective criteria. So when we put out that audit, you can know, people can know, NYCHA can know, residents can know. It's got that stamp of approval from what the Comptroller's Office does in audits. Of course, we'll stay in dialogue with the resident committee. Of course, we'll continue to gather feedback and input from residents, and that's really what's beautiful here, is bringing together what the audits are with the powerful kinds of input that you've already heard today. To close us out, I want to introduce two elected officials who I'm really grateful to for waiting to have the resident leaders speak first. Obviously, that's part of what we're trying to do with the Resident Audit Committee, but it's not always how we do things. So Senator Kavanaugh and Councilmember Marte deserve credit for being strong supporters of the public housing residents in their districts and coming out here this morning, even though this is, kind of audit focused, and they've got a lot going on in their legislative bodies. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime and good friend. Some of you know me as like a longtime housing policy wonk, and I got to say, there's no other better housing policy wonk to dig in on the details, the critical details of housing policy, and the fact that he's the chair of the Senate Housing Committee is so great on so many issues. This year in particular, he's the champion for these housing access vouchers, the HAVP program that we're all supporting and fighting for as a critical way to help folks who are homeless, to help folks who are at risk of losing their homes, to help folks who can't afford the rent, and he's championing that, but also working on so many other housing issues, absolutely including NYCHA. So please give a warm Smith Houses welcome to Housing Chair and New York State Senator Brian Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been in this room many, many times because this is, of course, the site of the the Resident Association meetings here that NYCHA chairs, so well and very frequently to make sure people stay engaged. I do want to begin by thanking all of the resident leaders who have spoken, but particularly NYCHA, who has been a singular champion, not especially for Smith Houses residents, but really for public housing residents throughout the city. She really has elevated the voices of public housing residents, really has sort of zeroed in on the critical issues and has made a huge difference already. And I expect, she and I have been talking about audits now for almost a year, and I expect that this effort to make sure these audits are focused in this way will also bear fruit. I do want to thank our Comptroller. As he said, he's been at this a very long time. time, even before he was an elected official. He was one of our city's great champions for making sure people have access to affordable housing, but also making sure that community voices. He was a community organizer, engaging with residents in communities that really needed to be engaged and needed to have their voices heard, even before he was an elected official, and certainly in many years in the city council, and now in his great role as the Comptroller. The Comptroller office has tremendous resources, and we in New York should be very proud that we have the Audit Bureau at the Comptroller's office that is able to delve in, sort through incredibly complicated amounts of information, and do that with a kind of integrity that ensures that when the results come out, we can believe them and we can act on them. So I think it's wonderful that those resources are continuing to be supported and be a big part of this Comptroller's work, but also what's going on today to increase the sense that New Yorkers should have that the Comptroller's office is responding to needs that are articulated by residents of our community. So this people-powered, people-centered process of determining what should be audited, I think, is a really wonderful step forward. And there's no, as the Comptroller said, there's no better place to start than by centering the residents of public housing who've been through so much. So, we are, as the Comptroller mentioned, we're working, currently working on a state budget. We're working on legislation and budgetary measures to try to improve conditions in the short term, working on getting more capital, working on getting those emergency rental assistance payments made to public housing residents who've been denied those, and a few other big things. Yuka's been to Albany twice already this session, and we look forward. She's coming back, but we've got a lot of work to do in the next 6 weeks. I know the city budget process is coming around too, and I know we'll hear from our great city council member Chris Marte soon. But just to say, we need to work on all fronts. We need the resources. We also need the accountability, and these audits will provide us with critical information that we need to provide proper resources and proper accountability. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and thank you again to the Comptroller and the whole team.
Thank you so much, Senator Kavanaugh. And to close us out, the council member for Lower Manhattan, including for Smith Houses, somebody who has shown a real commitment to organizing together with people, to listening to diverse voices in his community. And we're delighted today to have Councilmember Christopher Marte.
First of all, I want to thank Aita Torres for always opening her door. She doesn't need an audit to keep people accountable. You can see it on a weekly basis. Whether she's on the ground here or throughout developments in Lower Manhattan or in City Hall in Albany. She does an amazing work, and we're so glad that we can have her here to be a leader, a NYCHA leader for everyone. I also want to thank Brad Lander for really centering people first, making sure that the people who live these harms, that experience these issues on a daily basis, are the ones that are the foundation to this audit. So that's incredible work, and that's the type of work we usually don't see. Sometimes people just leave it to the experts to create their own reports, and then when we look at the reports, we say, where are the people being quoted? Who are you referencing? And most time, it's the NYCHA residents themselves that have been excluded. One thing that's really concerning to me is that why do we need a report? Why do we need an audit for NYCHA to tell the truth? Currently in my district, we have one development, Sewer Park Extension and Annex, that are going through RAD impact process. And when I showed up at those tenant meetings, I quoted the Human Rights Watch that Brenda Temple mentioned earlier. And when I showed them the report, they said, that's just an opinion. When we talked about how many families were being evicted and how quickly they were being evicted from their development, they had no response. They've lied to my office of when these community engagement meetings were happening, so we won't show up to try to organize and bring some of the facts. They lied to residents of when these events are going to happen, so then they can't organize their own tenants. This is a shame. NYCHA is supposed to represent the people that live in these buildings. And so why does it take an audit to cast a light on this? And so that's why we're here, not just to put a light on RAD impact and all its failures, but also when it comes to repairs. One of the biggest complaints I get in my office every single day is saying, my ticket closed, but I still have mold in my ceiling. My ticket closed, but every time it rains, I see the water in my apartment. My ticket closed, but we haven't had heat or hot water for weeks. Hopefully with this audit, we won't be receiving those complaints. We won't be asking those questions. So thank you, Brad Lanner, because you are taking a pivotal role in keeping NYCHA accountable. And thank you to the NYCHA residents for always being there. You don't have to be there, but you're there because you love your neighbors, because you love your developments, and you guys are the real heroes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. Just a couple more acknowledgments, and then if anyone has questions. First, in doing the NYCHA resident outreach, in addition to the remarkable leadership of residents themselves, and we had some help from some great community-based organizations. I want to shout out and thank Community Voices Heard, Youth Build, and Citizen Action of New York for helping with the outreach. I introduced our audit staff before, but we've got a lot of other folks working on this. So you heard from Nina Saxon. I want to say a big thank you to Nicole Christoul and Pilar Grullon, who have helped organize the Resident Audit Committee. And we've got a bunch of great other members from our public affairs and press teams here. So thanks to all of them for doing the work to make this day possible. But again, thank you first and foremost to the NYCHA resident leaders who, these are folks who are already organizing in their own developments, right? Every day somebody's saying, hey, can you help me with this issue? You know, my heat's not working. Can you help me get it back on? And so on top of that, to be willing to give time for something citywide, especially after so many years of leaning into processes that so often have failed to produce results, it really is a credit. You guys are like heroes of democracy, not only of your developments, and we're really grateful for it. So thank you so much. We'll be glad to take some questions if there are any.
Just for clarity and then a question.
Yeah.
Two separate audits, two separate teams, or the same team?
Separate audit teams. Yes? Yes. I guess, Maura, here, you come answer the technical questions here. But,
Yes, definitely two separate audit teams.
Okay. And then are there a core group of questions, 3 or 4 questions within these main overarching questions that you can shed some light on? And do you anticipate having to sue on the Rat Act investigation because it involves private entities to get some of this information?
Well,
If you, in Mike, please.
yeah, I would say that in terms of New York City Comptroller's authorities, we have very rarely had a resort to suit to obtain the information we need to conduct an audit. We don't know what we will find yet, right? Audits are evidence-based. So far, we are working on concerns that have been expressed by the end users, and we are following those expressions of concern, and we will look into the range of questions that they have raised in the context of an audit. What we find, we don't know yet, frankly, right? We won't rely on the results of Human Rights Watch. We will look at the data ourselves, and we will reach our own conclusions.
And I'll just say a little more about the authority, just so it's clear. So the Comptroller's Audit Authority follows essentially city dollars and contracts. So, most audits, we're obligated by the charter to audit every city agency, something about every city agency, at least once every 4 years. And so that means the lion's share of our audits are of agency work. But the Audit Authority extends when the city contracts with or pays for those services to be performed by another contractor or provider. And we have the same audit authority and power there. In general, agencies and contractors respond when we ask, and we make documents and production requests, and they generally provide them. We have subpoena power if necessary. I'm pleased to say it's very rarely necessary. We don't anticipate it will be needed here, but we wouldn't hesitate to use it if at some point we had to.
And one quick detail on the oversight of contractors. Do you currently have an open Reese House's arsenic investigation? And how much do you think it might run into this investigation?
We do not.
We do not have that underway.
Thank you.
All right. One challenge, I think, a good thing, but also a challenge of resident-empowered audits is people always have more ideas for audits we should be doing, and that's good. We got to match that to our capacity. Yes, all right. Yeah, all right. Let's go beyond reporters. So this is a great question because when we came in, so every audit has generally findings and recommendations. So yes, an audit, our auditors go in, look, they come up with what they find. Now sometimes, they find that things are being done as they're supposed to be being done. So they might say, all right, we investigated whether there was the appropriate controls in place. In this agency at this moment there were. We don't have recommendations but usually the findings, there are some shortcomings and the auditors develop recommendations. We started at the beginning of my administration putting all those recommendations up online in what's called our audit recommendations tracker. So you can see for every recommendation for every audit that we began starting last January 1st, first, what did the agency say? Sometimes the agency says, okay, we accept that recommendation and we'll try to do it. Sometimes they dispute the recommendation. Sometimes they say they already did it. Sometimes they say, we think that recommendation is stupid and we're not going to do it. Anyway, whatever they say, but most of the time, about 2/3 of the time, they say we accept that recommendation and we'll move forward. But what's new is now you can look up online and see we're going back to see did it get done. So both of these audits, in all likelihood, will have findings and we'll have recommendations. NYCHA will either accept or reject those recommendations. We'll be involved. One thing that'll be unique here is we'll be in dialogue with the Resident Audit Committee as that's happening, and then we'll also keep track of whether they implement them or don't implement them. The RAD Pact audit will be focused specifically on the question of evictions, and so recommendations will be related to the findings of that audit. Generally, an audit is more successful if it's looking at something pretty specific rather than kind of looking more broadly, because really what an audit is doing is not saying, do I think this is good or bad? It's saying, there's a set of rules and guidelines and protocols and policies. Are they being followed or not? And how do we measure that set of questions?
Just to close off, so to clarify, the solution is only recommendation to the issue that if you find an issue, it's only it's not.
So one shortcoming of audits for sure is that they don't have implementation authority. We're not the agency itself, so we can't say, okay, out of this audit, we're making this change. We can only call on the agency to make it. And we're also not, a prosecutor. If we find something in some audits, we find things that are actually, potential issues of law, and we refer those to prosecutors. That's why resident power is so important, because the audits don't enforce themselves. And so keeping at attention and focus on making those changes is really critical. Thank you so much. All right, one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, well, first I hear you might have a powerful co-complainer in the mayor, who I hear has also been subject to some, I'm just joking with you, I apologize. Here's what I would say. One, I actually think this is a great place to kind of conclude, because part of what it shows is when you show that something like our audits is supposed to be done in partnership and dialogue with New Yorkers, more people speak up and say, I got a problem, I would like you to look at it. So look, you got our whole audit team here and our whole public affairs team. So let's talk afterwards, take your information, and see whether that's something that we can bring a little more light to. New Yorkers in general, whether they're NYCHA residents or not, can suggest an audit on the Comptroller's website at comptroller.nyc.gov. We're excited. We thought the right place to begin this work is NYCHA, but this principle that we will do better at our job of oversight if more New Yorkers are engaged, involved, speaking about what matters to them, pointing at us at things that they think are broken, that we'll do that, and we believe that all across the board. So thank you for suggesting it. Let's follow up afterwards. Thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate it. We look forward, and we'll be back in touch when we got some audit results to bring to you.